a big stone floor, and they went in and beat it out. And then in about 1830s, 1840s, the first threshing machine was invented. And you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a difference between the separator that we're using right now versus the one that we'll see here in just a little bit. This is a hand-fed International threshing machine, and this one's probably going to be somewhere from around the 1920s. It'd be for kind of a smaller operation, barn threshing, a deal such as that.
Hey.
As soon as they do.
Well, you get all that stuff on videos and stuff, you know, you can get paid for some of it.
All right, so here we go.
You know, so.
Yeah. Before the combine was ever introduced. What Barbara's done, it was kind of it was a painstaking operation, because you would first go out to the wheat field and you had what was called a binder. And the binder would go out, it looked just kind of like the header of a combine. The binder went out, cut the wheat or the oats, and Jacob, hold that up real quick. Hold that up. And the binder would make what's called a shock, or a bundle. And that's what it would do right there, it would tie up a bundle. Well, you'd have all these bundles in, and then you would shock them to finish curing or drying the wheat out. And then later on, they would come through. They'd pick them up with a team of horses or the tractors on the wagons, and then they would bring them to wherever the threshing ring was at. Now, not every farmer could afford an operation such as this, so what they had was threshing rings. Now, these are still kind of common today, but we call them custom cutters. And they would do the threshing for all the neighbors. Everybody chipped in. Everybody came. It was always, whenever you talk to the old timers, it was what they called the glory days. They would eat like kings, but they would work their tails off as well. So, now that we've got the wheat through the threshing machine, what he's going to do is, you can see that he's feeding it down in there. And just like a combine works, the wheat's going in. He's got a cylinder in there with a concave that's spinning, and that is separating the wheat from the chaff. He's got a fan down at the bottom to blow all the chaff and everything else out the back end. So essentially, this is exactly what a combine does. Now, does anybody know where the term combine comes from? I know that you know. Combine goes back to the threshing. It's a combination of a binder and a threshing machine. They combined them both, and that's where the term combine comes from. So now you all know, there is your useless knowledge for the day, and you can go home and tell them you all learned something here at Winfield. And and feel free to get close if you guys want to look at this stuff, but the only thing that we ask, if you do get close, please mind the belt and the engine top. There's a lot of moving parts. But if you come up, whenever he is putting the wheat in up on top, as I said, it's going through the cylinder, through the concave, separating the grain from the chaff, and then down there on the bottom side, on the left-hand side, you have a good steady string. That keeps a good constant load on the engine, making Rick's job just a little bit easier. But as he's putting that in there, I want to draw your attention over to the steam engine a little bit, because right there on the top, you've got all them balls that are spinning around in a circle. Now, whenever he throws some wheat in, watch what those balls will do. You kind of see them moving in and out, and in and out, and in and out. And what that is actually what we call a governor. And that governor is controlling the speed of the engine, and it's also controlling how much steam he is putting in that cylinder. Now, this is what they call a single cylinder engine, and all of the power to this engine is right down there below the governor. So as you sit there and watch when he's throwing the wheat into the separator, you'll kind of see him moving in and out. And as they go wider, it's pushing a pin down, allowing more steam to come in. That way Rick can keep the same constant RPM on the engine that he needs in order to run the separator. He's also got, there's a little got a head full of steam up here, Rick. That's when you know you're a good fireman. But anyway, he's got a little dial down there. He's got a little knob that he can actually speed up or slow the engine down depending on what RPM he needs to run whatever machine. Separators usually run somewhere around 400 to 800 for the steam powered. Whenever in the 1930s, when the internal combustion tractors were starting to get pretty popular, they had smaller belt pulleys, and the separators were actually turned up to around 1200 RPM. The McCormick Deering would be one of the first to have the higher RPMs, and I want to say that that one's probably going to be around a 600 to 800 RPM separator, which are steam engines with a 44-inch pulley diameter. They're able to get the power and the speed to run that separator. And so he can control all that with that governor. He can speed it up, he can slow it down when he's in full throttle. And just a little bit ago, we seen a safety device that's on there, so we'll just kind of hit on that real quick and let you know that anytime you see steam coming out of that, it's okay. What that is called a safety valve, and all of these engines have been inspected from the state. Rick is actually one of our boiler inspectors, and so what that does is every boiler is calculated to what they call an MWAP, maximum allowable working pressure. I guess that's MAWP, but anyway, I'm from Missouri, so I don't get everything right all the time. But anyway, so every engine is set differently. Rick's engine is actually set for 100 pounds, so whenever there's a spring inside that steam safety valve, and whenever that hits 100 pounds, it will release the spring and drop it back down to whatever he's got it set for. And I think on his is about, what is it, like 98 pounds, drops it down about 2 pounds. So that's what so anytime you guys see those going off, that's what they call a safety valve, and that just keeps the engines at a safe working pressure. Now, when I first started running steam engines, when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, an old gentleman that ran engines all his life, he told me, he said, son, a good engineer will only let his safety valve go off one time, and that's in the morning to make sure it works. And there is no excuse, because it's a waste of water, steam, and fuel to let that thing go off again. So, Rick, we've already let it go off one time, so that was the safety. So we'll see if it happens again. So what he's doing back here now, you can kind of see that he's kind of turning, a mechanism of valves and pounds on his boiler. We're going to use that same 100 pounds to force water in there. How is that possible? The way that works is on that little injector, there's what we call a venturi. So we are creating a high pressure. When it goes through that venturi, it causes suction. So just as an airplane, here's the best way to put it, just as an airplane uses lift, where he has more airflow going over than he has under, is the same way that injector works. He's causing a high pressure, sucking the water up, and in there he is causing enough force that he can actually push with the exact same amount of pressure in the boiler against it and push water into his boiler. That was probably one of the greatest ideas I ever had back in 1903. That's the one that put the shingles on the roof. But when these engines were new, here's another little fun fact for you. When the first steam traction engines were introduced in the early 1880s, they didn't have an injector on them. They actually had a hand water pump. Now those engines the boilers were made of cast. They're
They're not made of the good material that we have today. And so in order for the engineer to put more water into the boiler, he had a hand pump and he had to manually pump water into the boiler. It wasn't until a few years later that the injector came out. When the injector first hit the market for steam engines, it was not sold with the engine. It was actually an add-on. It was a feature. So if you were to go down and buy this engine, or put your order in from the factory for an engine just like this, you would get the engine, the wheels. On the back is what they call contractor bunkers. And the reason they do that is because that's what was most popular for the contractors, because it gave you plenty of storage for fuel and plenty of room for water. Contractor bunkers were also an additional add-on. If you wanted a canopy, like the case has over there, that's another add-on. If you wanted, they even had a headlight like the Avery's got on the front of it, the old kerosene headlights. That's another add-on. So just like buying cars or trucks today, if you want the finer things and the luxuries, you had to pay for it. An engine like this in we'll say that this is a 1918. An engine like this would have ran somewhere around $2,500 with the canopy, the light, the contractor tanks. Advanced Rumley also made what they call saddle tanks, so you could have additional water storage up. They would actually sit kind of right in the middle of where the boiler's at. So you got to think that $2,500 doesn't sound like a whole lot of money. Well, put yourself back in there. In today's economy, that averages out to $56,478.23. And if you guys came up with a different figure, we'll argue about it later. I did Google that. So that, of course, that was a lot of money. So that was the reason that they had the custom threshing rigs, that those guys would one guy or several guys would pull up, buy an engine and a separator, and they would go around and custom thresh. Now, in doing so on custom threshing, how do we separate whose grain is whose, how much someone had? How do you figure that out? Well, if you look at the best way to put it, on that McCormick Deering separator up there at the top, what we call an elevator, there's a little trip bucket. On that trip, everything is weighed out to a peck. And how many pecks are in a bushel? Anybody? You guys are incredibly smart today. But those were measured out in pecks. And when they would start every wagon, it was always said whose wagon belonged to who. And the straw boss would not, there's a counter up there that every time that's tripped, it would trip the counter. And they was able to tell exactly how many bushel each person had and and they could keep everything separated and cataloged. That's two. And keep everything, that way everybody got paid. Now these engines actually served another purpose out here. If you put yourself in the early 1900s, we didn't have all of this nice open busted up ground that we know till today. These engines actually came out here and broke the prairie, and they would have, Randy Payton's got a very, very, very nice example of a 1/3 scale 110K. And it looks like one of our fine engineers finally got a little bit of steam up where we can actually run one of the big separators and kind of go over what's happening over there as well. Benita, Oklahoma. You just went down there and talked to the loader man and you filled your truck up. Well, actually, okay, so good question, very good question. The question was, what did these, so we're burning coal today, what did these engines burn in the 1900s? Well, we didn't have semis and loaders that went down to Bonita, Oklahoma and got all the coal that we needed. A lot of the early engines, and Advance was one of the big leading markets in what they called a straw burning boiler. And what they would do was they would actually burn the straw that came out of the back of the separator. And there would have been a brick arch that's in the boiler or in your firebox. That way, whenever you got a draft going, which you can kind of see out of the smokestack, because he is exhausting the steam through the stack, creating a draft, causing his fire to get hotter. But they'd have that arch in there. That way he wasn't blowing those embers up and catching the haystack on fire, because then you had a real big issue. And there have been countless and countless and countless times that has happened. Because you've also got to remember that when separators first came out, they weren't steel like these two are. They were actually wood. And they were pretty much just nothing but tinder when they went up. And boy, when they went hot, they went hot. And we've all seen wheat fields catch fire. So we know how rapidly they spread and what kind of position you can put yourself into. You can also burn wood and coal. In the northern countries, crude oil was actually introduced, and they'd have a tank on the front and an atomizer, and they would actually burn oil, just like the steam locomotives would. So, a lot of these guys with the engines, they were very innovative on what they had. They used the resources that were given to them, because when you get to western Kansas, there's not a whole lot of trees out there. So that was where a lot of the straw burning engines were at. They would have some coal, but there again, it was they used the resources that they had right there. The first of the week. So there it is. Our 10 o'clock at 10:20 threshing demonstration in the big hand of Jacob Metz for doing all the work. We do appreciate it. Our engineer, Mr. Rick Johnson. And I think here in just a minute, they've got the mighty Joyland 65 belted up.
So we go from the small threshing to the much larger demonstration, and this is a lot more common what you would see when we talked about the custom threshing rigs. This is a lot more, this is a better example of what you would actually see, the larger thresh machine. This is a 22-inch McCormick Deering separator, and so when I say 22 inches, that means that the cylinder inside the separator is 22 inches wide. There's one trick to figure out what size a separator is like this. At 22 or smaller, if you look up at the front, it looks like a pair of claws kind of coming at you. 22s and smaller only had 2 of those, and those are actually called cutters. And on those bundles, every single bundle has twine that's wrapped around that's holding it together. And those cutters, the job of those is to cut that twine. That way that bundle will kind of even itself out as it goes through the cylinder, through the walkers, through the fan, back up on the return elevator, back through it again, down to the bottom, through the blower, and then out the back. Did you all catch that? Because we'll go through it again if we need to. 22, so 28 would have been the next size up off a 22-horse separator, or a 22-inch separator. 28s into 32s actually had 3. When you got to 36 to 40 to 44 inches, they had 4. So just depending on how wide the throat or the mouth was. Power in our separator today is a 1920 65-horse case. And this engine, if you guys haven't looked on the back of it, actually has some very close ties and roots to Joyland that was in Wichita, Kansas. There was a gentleman, Harold Ottaway, that owned this engine, and back in the 1950s, steam shows weren't as popular, tractor shows weren't as popular as they are today. And Harold and Big Mac McLean Oh, the list goes on. A bunch of these gentlemen had got together and decided that our straw boss today, who was standing up there on the very top in the overalls, he is the man who is actually in charge of this whole entire operation on threshing. He was called the straw boss. It's his job to make sure that the bundle pitchers are putting the bundles in head first, solid down, and centered down the feeder. That way, when they get to the separator, it's just a nice even flow all the way through. Now, Jacob, hold one of your pitchforks up. Hold your pitchfork up. Yeah, hold that up in the air for me. Just hold it up in the air. Hold your pitchfork up. There you go. All right, so on the end there, another thing that Floyd is watching is every once in a while when it gets hot and dry enough that those tines are just held in there by friction, they will actually slide out in a bundle. So Floyd's job is not only to make sure that they're pitching evenly and straight and heads first, but to make sure that every time that bundle or that pitchfork goes back into the wagon, that the head is still on. Because if not, it's going to go through the cylinder. When it gets through the cylinder, it's going to break some teeth. It's going to jar up the pitchfork. But the most important part is the walkers that are in this separator are actually wooden. And when you send something through like that, it will tear your walkers up, and you're just in one heck of a bind. Now what he's doing right here is he's setting it's got a governor on there. All right, we can't have an authentic threshing show unless we have some breakdowns, because nothing can work perfect. So we got our clutch finally figured out where it'll catch. The feeder chain will hit it. The bundle will go to the feeder chain, into the knives, into the cylinder, through the concaves, out of the walkers, down through the fan, into the return elevator, then right out the back. So we are ready to thresh. I don't know where I left off, but we'll just pick up where I start. So anyway, Floyd is our straw boss. He is the man who is in charge of the operation. Jeff will only watch Floyd, and Floyd will be watching Jeff, and the rest of them, he lets him know whether he needs it. And so right there, he's telling them your RPMs are good, everything's running smoothly. This is exactly where I need you. So now all Jeff's got to do is just keep steam up, and that way they can continue threshing. So you notice kind of one thing that we talked about between the two separators is I knew it was a matter of time before they started leaving on that end. It never fails. So just as the wheat's got to exit both separators, where this the smaller one had what we call the walkers on the back, or the elevator, this one's got the blowers. So down below it's got a fan that's causing a draft at the very bottom, that's causing a draft all the way through that separator, which is helping separate the kernel from the wheat. And as that goes, there's a series of all the way down to the end, just about as long as Floyd's standing in right now. So warm it all up to that. So if you walk up there where Floyd's right hand is at, just below that is the elevator, and you see that trip. Every time that trip, that is one peck a week. And how many pecks are in the bushel? 4. The counter is on the left side, there's a cash counter, and every time that trip, you'll switch that counter. And so that's telling Floyd exactly how many bushels that we're getting off of this well. You all can see the walks and straw pitchers. If Because if they do their job correctly, every bundle will go in head first. So when I say head first, where the wheat is actually on the end of the stalk, that's what they call the head. And you always want the first one separated because it will flex cleaner, and it's a lot easier, and you have less of a chance to cross the separator. That's also the reason why they try to get the center of that can. That way they're not, overdoing the left side and the right side. It's all going to equal all the way to the breast pieces.
See what we can find. Lady had just brought up an Irwin box cutter, an Irwin blue box cutter. So if you lost one, check your pockets. I see everybody's checking their pockets right now. But if you lost a blue box cutter, come see me. I'll have it in the meal, and we'll get it back to you.
Ooh-wee, all right. Well, well, they must be done. They're done for now.
Well, I know, but somebody's got to pull it over there.
All we do is this farmer is recognized solve problems.
Oh, wait, no, not by the hour, by the bird.
Okay, I think I'm gonna call it a day. That was very interesting. That was really cool. But I think I'm done for the day. Got straw all over me from head to toe and all over my camera and everything else. I got to see like 2 demonstrations that I did not get to see yesterday. So I think it's been an interesting, enjoyable morning. I thank you for joining along with me. I do thank all my subscribers. Hope you enjoy these videos. And I think I'm going to, like I said, call it a day and get cooled off and get something cold to drink. Hope you all have a really nice weekend. And as always, hopefully anyway, I will see you on the next video. So, bye for now.